Aku krungu ana wong crita ceritane Pak Presiden Pak Bung Karno rapat kenang Jatisari yen ora salah taun.
The meeting in Indonesia brought together around 35 participants from 18 countries from across the five continents. And there were around, I think, 13 Indonesians that participated, coming from the labor, farmers, women, indigenous movements, and NGOs. And the purpose of the meeting is basically to dive into the topic of industrial politics from below. Because the working group has often worked with the principle of grounding the theme and the issues that we're going to be discussing in the territory and struggles of the movements.
We can see, especially after the independence, how the economic basically led by the states and controlled, including how some of the companies owned by the Dutch then nationalized by the government. But then after the post-colonial, especially during the new order under Suharto's and also the Reformation era, we can see the changes between the economic development led by the states and then changes into the idea of neoliberal economy, where finally the state itself becomes one of the actors that take part in the extractions activities, including the exploitations activities in the people's lives.
In Indonesia, there is national strategic plan for industry. The first is about reindustrialization. Why? Because there is a deindustrialization process in Indonesia, and then the contribution of industry in GDP is minimum compared to the other decades. The company from United States, it's moved to China, then to Vietnam. In Indonesia, it's the international company who came here before, moved their factory to the Vietnam, to the China.
Indonesia is rich with minerals, and there are a lot of things that you can dig from the womb of Indonesian soil. In 2009, there was like downstreaming regulation in which the government banned the export of raw materials, so they have to process it here, and it was the start of the so-called nickel boom. There were so many investors, mainly from China, came to Indonesia to invest here.
So basically, these special economic zones developed by the government to support the agenda of downstreaming industry of Indonesia's mineral to build an end-to-end EV battery productions.
Most of impact is land grabbing, like in mining industry in Central Sulawesi for nickel.
For examples like industry on plantations, mining, infrastructure development project, or like the forest industry or military facilities that overlap with the people's land rights. So people losing their land rights, but until now the governments like keep giving the land and natural resources to the big capital.
People, communities, farmers, in our case, workers, in the case here in Indonesia, are fighting for what we can call simple things, but at the same time really vital and important. They fight for land, they fight for food sovereignty, they fight for well-being, they fight for labor rights, they fight for justice in terms of environment, social, economic justice.
I live in two different worlds when you live in Jakarta most of your life, and then when you go outside Jakarta, everything is so different, and I feel like Jakarta lives is very much supported by what's going on in the rural areas.
The tea plantations also tells us about the historical aspect of the colonial era, but then we can see the nationalizations process during the Sukarno's era that also strengthened the role of the state through state-owned enterprise. But then when it changes into the different governments that took control on these tea plantations, that also changes how the conflicts will also as the central of the problems of the economic development itself. And then we go to this Chatra coffee. The Chatra coffee basically a collective economy initiated by young people in the village using the instrument basically from the village governance through BUMDes. BUMDes is like these village-owned companies that are also supported by the states.
I mean, that's the contribution from the village government, then the youth generation to make an alternative economic like that. It's a good idea.
But on the other side, BUMDes itself has some limitations and also some criticism because that will depend on the leaders on the village and very potential to open any corrupt practice.
Industrial policy, which has often been, thought of as passé in economics and even in state planning, for example, which has, its heyday in the 70s. Having its day under the sun, and the industrial policy now is being discussed under the green banner.
At the beginning of the creation of the European Economic Community, there was a certain form of vertical industrial policy, mainly in the coal and steel branch, because after the Second World War this was very important, and it was mainly to shield the European industry against other ones, mainly of course against the US ones, to support the creation of own industries. Then with the neoliberalization of the EU in the 80s and 90s, the so-called horizontal industrial policy became dominant. The task of public policy is to create an environment for the firms, for the corporations to act successfely.
The Korean industrialization starts 1960s and moved for the 70s and 80s. Mostly that industrialization strongly led by the state, authoritarian government, used the economic development as a justification for their authoritarian power.
For me at least, I can't see a Philippine state that is separable from that colonial legacy and that colonial root. And when I hear Indonesian friends talk about how they want to return or they want the promises of their constitution and their previous government to come true, it's like a reference of it's just the current regime that is the big problem right now. In the Philippines, that was never the case.
Well, when we talk about state planning, it's not just limited to those strong states in Asia. It's not just China or Japan or South Korea, but we see state planning as well. For example, in Germany, where the state directs what will be the strategic industries. Of course, there's a difference between the capacity of the state in the global north to give that support to strategic industries and the capacity of governments in the south to give support to those strategic industries. Because first and foremost, the hindrance for countries in the global south is that a lot of our budget, a big percentage of our budget, is already allocated for paying off debts.
In Latin America, for instance, the region where I come, 85% lives in city. It's urban population. And they depend on massive industrial production to move, to eat, to access health, education, etc. We are facing a climate catastrophe. It's not something of the future, it's something that we are suffering now. And that implies the need for a massive and rapid transformation of the global economy. And that implies, either we like it or not, strong state intervention.
The state could use their own economic tools to protect what needs protecting, like the national industries. And that is where the question of what can you do to control or discipline, I use the term discipline capital.
Actually, the resurgence of the discussions on industrial policy, the new industrial policy or green industrial policy, needs to be understood in that context, specifically the context of the rise of China and the anxiety and the fear that it elicits in the Western imperial camp in terms of their hegemony and domination of the global value chains and the new green economy. But then what we noticed from all these discussions around the Green Cold War, that these discussions need to be centered in these 2 or 3 poles, European Union, United States and China, excluding the majority of the world. Maybe there are some pockets where these discussions are taking place in terms of moving up the value chains, industrializing your economy, but these conversations are happening in countries like Indonesia, big economies. There is a possibility that the latter will be even kicked away even further to those rising economies or to countries in the global south.
Projects of European common interest, the IPCEIs, that said, okay, we need to create European champions via within the hydrogen sector, microchips, clouds, and others to compete internationally.
Their narrative. In their narrative, they are saying that the green hydrogen is part of the green economy, the transition to a green economy in these countries, and they are pushing it as an alternative economic agenda, to be used in this climate crisis. But the truth is, it is not. It's an extractivist economic model where we are seeing the global south role is to export the raw material with low added value and to import the technology with high added value.
I felt that there were 2 rather polarized camps, people who only wanted to talk about industrial policy from above, we can call it, with reference to the significance of the state. There was also people who wanted to talk about industrial policy, but criticizing, opposing, resisting the state. And then, especially the Indonesian participants, the Indonesian comrades, they were very much interested in industrialization from below and looking at the significance of industrial politics.
We need the top policy coming from the states, hopefully democratic states, but we also need, support from below, input from below.
We can mean very different things by industrial politics, and that also depends on which level we are looking at. So it can be on a geopolitical level, where we want to unsettle unequal exchange and gain more independence for the global south. Or we can look at it as the driving force of the expansion of capitalist space-making and exploitation since the Industrial Revolution that is actually crushing on communities, dispossessing them from their livelihoods and having very negative effects on the environment too.
I think when people think about industrial politics from below, or just maybe industrial politics more broadly, people think of the factory, or people think of sort of big industry, or development. And what we saw was absolutely all of that, but the underbelly and the dispossession, the stories of dispossession and struggle.
There are questions that come up. Who decides what the resources are and how they should be used? Is it the global market? Is it the governments? Is it the people? Is it the communities?
Above all, we talk about from the ground, from below, means that this process cannot be from up going to down. Means all the stakeholders need to bring their understanding and their reflection.
There is a lot of room for convergence, and we already saw that in the discussions here in Indonesia. It was clear to all of us that we are fighting the same enemy. Basically, we are fighting capitalism, we are fighting extractivism, we are fighting the hegemonic model of development.
The national strategic industry should make the majority of the people will have a benefit from that national strategy, not serve the industrial policy of the international trade system.
And we have to reclaim the narrative to be people-centered, democratic, and egalitarian. And that's how I want to live my life in the next coming years.
These people here have come with creative ideas in terms of demands, in terms of asking for their well-being. We do not have only to see them as alliances, but we have to put them in the forefront of our fights.
The underdevelopment and the development are just two sides of the same coin. And any attempts to catch up with the so-called West or the global North within the rules of the game, which are dictated by free trade agreements, the global economic and financial architecture, is just illusory. So that's why we need to challenge the rules of the game. Challenging the rules of the game, it means starting with the local priorities.
For instance, emphasizing local and national sovereignty over natural resources, that natural resources should not be a collateral damage for the sake of having industries or industrialization, and democratic control over production and technology, the question around ecological responsibility, and regenerative land stewardship and agrarian reform, for example, the importance of solidarity economies that are rooted in cooperation and not competition.
The idea of the future development should not come from the states, but also it should come from the peoples itself.